All right, J Dell, let me just start off. We're going to be talking today about this NAR settlement. You sent me something the other day about like Warren Buffett and his position on it. I think that's pretty fascinating. But so it's kind of like preface what that video is about and then his stance on it.
Yeah, the first thing is like Home Services of America is Warren Buffett's, real estate company, Berkshire Hathaway, and they actually just canceled their annual event. So they said that registration was low, obviously with the NAR settlement going on, all the things, but they've been one of the last holdouts in the industry to come to a settlement. And old Warren said at the beginning that there was no way he was going to settle because there was, there's a lot of people out there actually that said they're not going to settle. And like even Pulte Homes now has came out and said, we're our own brokerage and you're wrapping us up into this class action lawsuit. And, how can we basically sue ourselves? That like makes no sense. And so there's like been some pushback from these brokerages and even, EXP hasn't settled. They said they're open to the conversation, but they haven't had the conversation. The reality is though, is that the attorneys put out basically a blanketed formula saying if you want to settle, here's the number. So I don't understand like why they're saying like we're not in conversations. They basically told them what they need to pay. Um, but yeah, the whole Warren Buffett thing in his conference or his annual event that he had for the shareholders, he let the president of NAR or of Berkshire come up, Home Services, and talk about the real estate sector, and they basically tried pulling on the heartstrings by stating that, they brought that agent up that said, I've been in real estate with my family for, decades. And, I've been at Berkshire for 30 years. And, like, where do you think this thing's going? And they basically just said, the real estate agent's always going to be needed. Yeah, there are certain people out there that can do it by themselves, so on and so forth. But, uh, the industry is very interesting at this moment. Obviously, the NAR came out and said that they're going to inject the new process starting August 17th. So we'll
Was
see what
that pushed
happens.
back?
What's that?
That was pushed back, wasn't it?
Yeah, from mid July. Actually, it said July, and then they came to a conclusion or a final date of August 17th.
And do you think that'll get pushed back?
No, this one's locked in stone.
That's locked in. I want to talk about like our side of the business and what how it affects it or what you see with it.
Yeah. So, and
Um,
I think it's August 17th. It's either August 17th or August 27th. So one of those two dates. Uh, well, when you say like what it means for us, what are you referencing?
so that and I was kind of like prefacing. I got a couple more like questions for you as actually just a curious bystander. I think there's a lot going out there being said, but first
Yeah.
of all, we'll talk about being buyer heavy too, what that means. But
Mhm.
do you think like, and this is me just honest opinion, do you think a guy like Warren Buffett, his team, do they go out there and just say that shit to help like their stock, to help their company, or do they feel it?
I think, the reality is, dude, and like I say this since the beginning, is like you think about for sale by owners and like listing agreements. And I always
Right.
have to go back, like reset my mind of saying the listing side has always been like this. And people always say like buyers are liars, blah 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 blah. Well, the reality is you're basically when you're working with buyers without a buyer broker agreement, you're basically taking a listing without a listing agreement. And if you gave a seller a listing contract that was like an open contract where they could use any agent they wanted and they could even sell it themselves, and whoever brings the buyer gets paid, that's basically what you're doing with the buyers right now. So, I think, professionals are needed. Do I think 10% of the buyers out there could probably do it themselves? I think so. But, there's a couple of people I love listening to on social media, and there's one guy that talks about how 70% of his, unrepresented buyers that make offers on his listings end up failing the contract and they get to keep 100% of their earnest money. So I think there's a lot of these, internet warriors that can go out there and, YouTube around and find out, how to write a contract. But, I've had multiple buyers call me. They're like, I'm going to represent myself. And then the first thing they ask you to do is write the contract.
Right.
And it's like, that's not what you just said. You're representing yourself, you know? So, I always correlate it to like going to court. Like one is you can represent yourself in court. You can also get a public defendant. You can hire an attorney or you can hire a specialist. I think regardless, I think the legal protection and everyone's always like, well, it's a legal protection, like I never get legal protection. And people also have this concept in their mind when they're hiring an agent of like, what they're really going to get versus what they do get. So, when clients say like, "Oh, my buyer or my agent spent, 1 day with me and, he made
Hmm.
15,000 bucks." I'm like, if you felt that way and your agent like made you feel like the process was very simple and easy, that's because they have a system set up to make it feel that way. So I always ask the buyer and the seller, like, how much pain do you want to feel through this experience? Like, do you want me to make this super easy and know that like, the process is simple, or do you want to feel a lot of pain and feel like you're getting your money's worth because you value pain over easy? And because a lot of sellers and buyers just, they don't see the full system because they don't. Once the deal goes under contract, it kind of like, it's the lender taking over, or it's the buyer side that's taking up all the time. And it's just like I said with an attorney, people pay different rates for different attorneys. You get different results. But if you could hire the best attorney and you knew that they were going to get you the best result, people pay the price. And I think the same thing goes for real estate agents. So I think, being able to correlate, everyone says like, oh yeah, you got to, add value and this and that. Like, I think the new modern way, it's going to be like listing houses, is still referrals going to be the number one driver. But I do think people are going to be like looking deeper into like what they're getting out of their agent based on the fact that they could be paying for it now. And I think, experience, you know, how much, like, what are you getting for your buyers in different markets, how educated you are, all the things. The buyer's consult is going to be super important. And I think that's like where we've won big time with our business model, is like we always get them on Zoom at the beginning.
Right.
And so you're basically doing a buyer's consult right up front. Now it's going to have to add in a couple layers. So like I've been telling the agents that we work with, hey, start having these conversations now, because come August 17th, D-Day, it's going to be a whole different situation. And the sellers are still going to be paying the commissions for the most part anyways, because when you submit your offer of compensation, I mean, if you tell 4 buyers, hey, you can ask the seller to pay your comp, what do you think the buyers are going to do? They're not going to say, oh, let me pay that now.
Yeah. What what happens on August 17th? Does everybody have to unlist and or just go
No,
in and edit?
no, it's just an addendum. And so like basically, so what NAR said is that because they own most of the MLSs, they said that they can't basically remove the MLS offer of compensation like with the flip of a switch, which I think is complete crap. I think that's a lie. So they're allowing everyone to adjust their addendum. So basically, you'll just sign an addendum saying this original listing contract said that we were offering an offer of compensation on the MLS. We are now removing that, and it's up to the buyers now and the buyer's agent to submit their offer of comp with their offer. And the same thing has already been in effect in Washington State since January 1st, 2024. So it's nothing new for us in Washington. This has been a normal thing. However, on the contract in Washington State, it says that the offer of comp is stated on the MLS. If it's below the number that you have agreed upon with your agent, what are you going to do in that event? Are you going to allow them to negotiate? Are you going to walk away? Or are you going to make up the difference?
Yeah.
So with the NAR settlement, the comp can't be brought up. It can only be brought down. So you better have a good agreement up front, because that's what's going to be the baseline of your compensation structure.
Okay.
And I
Yeah,
know
this
sellers are, dude, it's the media has really mixed this whole thing up and caused a lot of
mhm.
problems. Like we've gotten a lot of sellers calling us saying like, oh yeah, when can we move the offer of comp for the buyer's agent? And I said, well, do you think this is a good thing or a bad thing? They're like, well, it's great because I don't have to pay it anymore. I said, well, what
Right.
happens when you get one offer, your house has been on the market for a year, and it says that you're going to pay the buyer's agent 10% on your $1 million house? What are you going to say? No. Like
Right.
you're in a desperate situation. So I think there's going to be a lot of lawsuits that come about out of this with agents and clients.
Yeah.
I mean, I already see like
Yeah.
we're in a really unique period right now, and it's getting crazier every day.
Yeah, this actually I was kind of Googling while you were talking, but and this also has some interesting points, but it says, Washington Real Estate Service will not join the national antitrust settlement. So the basically the major parts of Washington, Seattle, and all that, the Northwest MLS, is not going to join that. But if you scroll down, it actually, this is what you were just talking about. NAR's removal of compensation transparency from the MLS pushes consumers and brokers to make secret deals off MLS, inviting deceptive practices, discrimination, and unfair housing. The statement said depriving buyers of information about the transaction risks harming buyers, especially those buyers who are already disadvantaged, including first-time home buyers and
Yeah.
the protected classes.
What's the date of this article?
Yesterday.
Okay, so the interesting thing is I think what you're going to probably see in the next 12 months is you're going to start seeing articles come out that say that this situation created the biggest divide in housing affordability in the history of America. So the reason that the whole structure of the way things are done today was brought in was done in the 90s by a association that wanted to give fair housing offerings to buyers, right? So
Yeah.
this was the most fair structure. And people always compare the US to like Australia and England. We work with agents in those markets, and they all say that all those markets are the most messed up markets. This way that we have today was due to like decades of really hard work to put into place a fair structure. Now you're going to a different structure. Well, like even with veteran loans, they can't pay the buyer's agent compensation. So if they submit an offer and the seller says they're not paying it, the buyer can't pay the buyer's agent. So what are they going to do? They're going to walk away. So
Hmm.
the people with the least amount of money are going to be in the biggest, the worst position. And it's just a very, very interesting time. And I know like there's been all these sites that came out and they're like, oh, you can put your buyer's comp on our sites and this and that. Well, the reason NAR is getting sued is because they were displaying commissions on a site. They were saying it was price fixing. So what do you think would happen to all these other companies that are doing it? They're going to say that everyone's going to turn a blind eye now? No. Even the attorneys and even at our brokerage, they were saying at the beginning, they were saying only if you're advertising to your own internal agents can you do that. If it's forward facing to the public, you're going to get nailed. Well, I saw all these ads popping up for people doing that. Even KV Core released an update saying you could do it on their site. Well, the DOJ and NAR came out and said if there's any display of compensation on any other website that's being fed by the MLS, your MLS account will be terminated or suspended. So I knew that that was going to come down, and that's why I was even commenting on some post, and they basically were like, you don't know what you're talking about." Well, guess what? All those people have like dissipated now.
Yeah, I think it's going to create a lot of animosity, and then just being fucking real, like being in this industry as long as we have, and I'm not long, 4 or 5 years, whatever it is, but like being in like the marketing space of this and talking, I just see some snakes coming out of the
Oh,
grass, man. Like some serious fucking snakes doing some shady to get buyers, sellers, promising things. And
I've already seen it.
yeah, oh yeah,
I've seen two really unique situations.
yeah.
One, I saw a. Well, do you want to finish your comment first?
No, I just like I'm just like I say like I guess from more of a buyer standpoint or like a person standpoint instead of the realtors, but I'm just like it's obvious what's going to happen.
Well, there's already been like Zillow put out their 1 week release, basically saying that they'll work with you for a week for free. Uh, and basically, but you have to use their lending. They're basically going to the CarMax model where you basically work with their agents for free, but you have to use their loan. There's also another one out there I just saw where it says work with our buyers agents for free, and then you also get a rebate. Well, if you read their terms and conditions, it's only if you buy the first house you see with that agent and you on the first showing. So it's after that you go to move into their contract. So those are two examples of weird
Yeah.
things I've seen. But the third thing I saw was a buyer's agent got their client to sign a buyer's broker comp that said that they would pay them 2.5% on the way she structured it. The conversation was really unique.
Yeah.
So when the settlement statement came out, it basically there was 2.5 being offered on the MLS, 2.5 from the buyer's agent or from the buyer, so 5% total. The buyer said that that's not what she was under the impression of. She said that she was under the impression that the compensation was being removed off the MLS and that she agreed to paying it in the event it wasn't being paid, but that's not what the contract said. So the agent finally agreed to remove half of the comp, um, which I thought was the fair thing to do. But and I know why she took advantage of the situation, and that's what I think you're going to start seeing a lot of. Is I think you're going to start seeing a lot of people take advantage of people. Agents are really desperate right now, especially with the way the market is.
Yeah.
And anytime that there's pressure on the market, you usually see, you know, lawsuits, settlements, litigations popping up like crazy. I mean, dude, in the last 12 months, I've been a part of like 6 of them. It's been nuts.
Yeah, yeah, I see it too.
And here's the other thing. This is another reason hiring a good buyer's agent or a listing agent is really important because if you go to court or you go to litigation or whatever it may be, you want to make sure that all your I's are dotted, your T's are crossed, and the situation you're being managed properly in the transaction. Like obviously agents aren't lawyers, but it's very simple to read a contract and say, how can I give my seller or my buyer the highest level of protection in this contract? So that way, if somebody's reading it, everything is clear. And that's like, that's been the defining thing in most of or the court hearings or whatever we've gone through, it's always like everything is so clear and concise that you can't really argue with it.
Yeah. So something that comes easier for you, hard for a guy like me, like selling wise, let's say August 17th or 27th or something hits and you just procure a buyer. Like,
Mhm.
how does that conversation go to get that commission to ask for the business? Because that's like, that seems like a difficult conversation for me. And like you said, start now so that you build up to it. But
This is the
what are
way
you
I
saying?
yeah, so the thing is like I always start off I think the way that if you say it confidently and you act like it's no big deal, it's going to be no big deal. If you put a lot of emphasis on it, you act like everything's crazy and the world's crashing down, and it's always about education. So instead of assuming that your sellers and buyers know, the way I always tee up those conversations is I always just say, if I'm meeting with a seller, I always say, are you familiar with how we get paid? And then they'll give me some form of way that we get paid
Why do you ask them a question?
because I want them to explain to me what they know. Because if they're just like, if I start blabbering out my mouth, they might already know everything. So I can gauge their level of knowledge also as a seller. And also I'm trying to get them to the point of telling me how they know a buyer's agent is compensated.
Hmm.
So what I say is I just say, are you aware of how we're compensated as listing agents? And then they tell me whatever they say. And then if it's accurate, I'll say that's correct. If I need to add a couple things, I'll add in some things. If it's completely off base, I'm just like, all right, maybe you sold a house in 1990. The way that it works today is this way. And then
Hmm.
I get to the point where I say, are you aware of how a buyer's agent is compensated? And where the buyers are going to come from, because a lot of sellers do believe that the listing agent is bringing all the buyer and the seller. And it's just so interesting, all of the different ways I've heard. I talked to a lady last night actually who was calling on one of our listings, and she's like, yeah, I'd like to buy your property if it's a good fit, but I also have two other houses I need to sell, and I just want to work with one agent for everything,
Yeah.
like for the buys and the sells for her houses too. She's like, yeah, that's how we've always bought our properties. And I'm like, that would be crazy. In today's modern society and modern way of doing real estate, it's like 99% of the houses are sold with a buyer's agent, right? Not the listing agent, dual representation. So what I want the seller to say in that conversation is that, yes, I pay the listing agent a percentage. And then if the buyer's agent brings their agent or their client to the table, then you share your compensation with that buyer's agent. So then that's typically, like, I would say 90% of the buyer sellers that I meet with say that exact thing because they've typically been through this process. I mean, these are typically like 2 and 3 time home sellers that know the way it
Hmm.
works. Now, if they're like, and actually the surprising thing that's been most surprising to me is when I tell them that the way it's changing, they've all have been, for the most part, angry about it. And like being like, what, this makes no sense. And I think it's because they've now have lost control of what the comp is going to be paid out.
Yeah.
And also they know that they're going to be on the other side of that buying contract, and they could potentially have to pay a buyer's agent on their sell. And then if it's a multiple offer situation or whatever it may be on the other side, they might be paying their buyer's agent comp as well. But I do feel 90% of the sales out there coming in the future, the seller will still pay the offer of comp, if not 95%. And I think that agents will just write it into the contract. Say the house is listed at 500 and the seller's refusing to pay, they'll just bump it up to 515, which we see in closing costs already. These are all tactics that have already been in existence,
Okay. So that, and
and
then that's what's
the
going to pay the
and the
commission.
lenders have already said that they won't count that buyer's agent comp towards the allowable credits on the loan. So everyone's working to make this thing happen. I mean, everyone knows it's a joke.
Yeah.
The real estate industry is the number one driver of the GDP in the entire world. So it's like you're disrupting the number one global economy driver, and that's nobody wants that.
Yeah. And then the sellers that are now, shit, I'm only going to pay you. I'm not paying the buyer's agent. Their stuff's going to sit a little bit more. And then that's going to cause steering and it's going to be obvious.
Well, the reality is the seller still only pays the listing agent today. This listing agent pays the buyer's
True.
agent. I
Now,
know what you're
can
saying though.
on the flip side of that, will you see agents who are representing buyers write into their contract that like if this buyer was to ever purchase a property anywhere, I am owed
Yeah,
3% commission,
yeah,
and
yeah.
that could be a problem too.
Well, it would be like in your MLS, and honestly, even at our brokerage now, they're saying like we should basically write the contracts as like 1 month terms, and saying that the contract can be revisited every 30 days. Like it's a 120-day contract. So they have two, every state has their own for the most part contracts, but then brokerages have their own contracts as well for the states that haven't caught up. Even in Idaho, they haven't released the forms yet.
Yeah.
So at EXP, they have a one showing contract, and then they have a multiple. So they call it like a a dating contract, and then a long term relationship contract. And yeah, I mean, if it's in your MLS, like that's the way I always wrote the buyer broker agreements. Also, was like if you buy a house in our MLS, like, and I'm owed an offer of compensation.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't. That's the thing though, is it. Let's just say you're working with me, and I'm like, Jackson Wilkie to pay Jesse Dow 2.5% commission, or however we phrase it up, and then we submit that offer of compensation to the with our purchase and sales agreement to the seller. So it's up to the seller to decide. And I like right now the house values are with the seller paying full commission at whatever the market average is in that market. So let's say Portland, it's 5.
Yep.
So at $600,000 house at 5% is what the value of the house is. So now you're telling me that the house value is going to stay the same. He's going to take off 2.5%, and he's going to still sell the house for the same price. Everyone's going to be savvy to that game. Agents are smart. Agents aren't stupid. Some sellers are going to try to get greedy, and some people will win. But at the end of the day, the masses will dictate what happens in the situation, and we'll just find out in a couple months.
What happens to a strong buyer business? Like we're very buyer heavy. Like, what do you see?
Nothing.
Nothing.
I think
Does
it's going to
that
be.
help you
It's
get listings because you've got so many buyers, or what?
No. I mean, how many of your buyers really buy the listings that you take? Like it's like 1 out of 100.
Right.
I think like all that stuff is just like white noise, and people trying to say like, oh, it's like I have all this
Yeah.
incremental ways to get buyers. At the end of the day, we all know it's the marketing that you do to the buyers in the world that have buyers agents that are bringing their, I could see buyers thinking that they're going to save money by going directly to the seller, which already happens today.
That's what
But
I
it's
wanted
like
to talk
if a
about.
buyer
Yeah.
comes directly to me, you know what I'm thinking? We're going to take advantage of this fool, and we're going to get our seller's going to kill it.
Yeah. And we've had a lot of talks about that. Buyers going direct. And in our case here in Houston, with so much new construction going direct to the builder,
Yeah.
we've now put in a couple different plays in just the last 2-3 weeks, which has significantly increased our contracts.
Yeah.
But I actually crazy weekend. I had 3 different couples come up to me in random spots. One night was sushi. One night was a grocery store, and I don't remember where I was with my wife and kids. Of, oh my god, I love your videos. Like it's really starting to pile. Another one was local. We're getting a lot of local people. And this lady comes up. We're at sushi, and me and my wife finally got like alone time, and like just sit down. And here comes a lady. Oh my god, I don't mean to bug you, but I've seen your YouTube channel. And she's like, I'm moving here. She gives me the whole spiel, and I'm kind of like, cool, the people trying to take orders, and um, she's like, yeah, we're moving. So you said you moved out of this area and that. So she's trying to get all this information. She's really nice. And then she finally is like, I'm sure you're going to ask why I didn't call you. And I'm like, yeah, I was kind of wondering. She goes, I am handcuffed by my company. They only have relocation realtor. She worked at Chevron. Like, and
Yeah.
I'm in Houston. This is Chevron, Exxon. You actually don't even realize how big they're big, but you don't realize how big until you live here, how big. And
Dude,
that is
Chevron's like the fourth biggest company in the world. I used to
and
call on Chevron Global out of San Ramon.
yeah, and being from Idaho, like I was never around oil, didn't even know anything about it. But I would say 95% of the people I know here are fucking oil, and they move. But that was another thing I actually told Joe. I said, feel good about that. Like that's another reason that we may not be getting this. They're not going directly to the builder or buyer, but they are handcuffed by their realtor. And Joe looks at me, and goes, "No, dude." He goes, "EXP is a freaking relocation company. We can do that. We need to start talking about it." He goes, "Let me call them first and figure it out." Um, but if that's something that we can throw into our marketing as well, of like, hey, we actually have relocation certificate, I don't know.
So the way that works is so Berkshire actually is so Berkshire Hathaway owns the biggest relocation company in the world, and that's primarily it has nothing to do with the brokerage. It's their relocation company. So they
Right.
go in and get the contracts. They send those contracts to their agents. EXP is like making massive headway because Berkshire's I'm not sure if Berkshire is a franchise. I think it is a franchise, but the EXP is a one owner brokerage. So like we've picked up like 40% of the industry's relocation contracts with all these corporations. So I know what they're saying, but at the end of the day, it's like, just because you're a relocation doesn't mean that you're like, this is like a corporate play. And I'm
Mega.
sure Warren Buffett probably sits on the chair of Chevron or the board. He probably invests billions or millions of dollars into Chevron. So he probably gets their relocation contract. So, he's got a very good angle in on those deals. And yeah, we've dealt with the relocation business.
Yep.
And that's why I even like in Portland, like we don't even deal with Nike employees really anymore and a few of these other ones because it's just a nightmare. And it's
Yeah, and
like,
that they don't know any different. Like
no.
I talk to realtors all day, and they're like, I don't get why they don't fuck call me and this and that. And I'm like, simplicity of this, right? Like this family now is moving across the country for a new job. They don't know these areas, and what's presented to them is, hey, don't worry about a thing. We're gonna pack your stuff up. We're gonna pay
Mhm.
for your moving. We're gonna pay for your closing cost. This is what she told me.
Yeah.
She goes, it was just, and that's how do you compete,
And here's the other thing, dude. This is like what I had this conversation with another agent yesterday. I said, everything you've just told me is 1% of your business.
Yep.
Now, you're so worried about fixing the 1%. Or let's even make it more, 10%. You're so focused on trying to fix 10%. Focus on the 90% of that's driving the business, and don't worry about that other stuff. It's going to happen all the time,
Exactly.
and
Yep.
it's going to ruin it's going to ruin you.
Focus on the business that you have and making it amazing and growing that,
Yeah.
than not focusing. I was totally off subject, but was listening to a Joe Rogan talk to this gal, and she said the same thing, who does like child depression and that kind of stuff. And it's like they think about 90% of their thoughts are going towards the bad things in their life, and that's what causes a deeper and deeper and deeper like hole. And
Yep.
it probably could be a plague in the real estate industry, is I can't get deals, I can't procure things. And that's all you're focused on, instead of like, wow, I have actually got some good business here and some good clients I can try and get more deals out of.
Yep. Oh yeah, dude. It's the plague that plagues everyone. And it's so
Plague.
crazy to me just hearing the conversations that come out of people's mouths um,
Yeah.
about what they could be doing versus what they are doing. It's like procuring cause is gone now. And I was just telling my wife, Rachel, this last night. I was like, because she always brings up procuring cause with YouTube. And I'm like, well, that conversation's gone. And she's like, well, that's crappy now and this and that. And I said, well, have you ever actually used it? And I'm like, and you've never heard about it on a listing contract? Like,
Right.
I'm like, no, I go, no one's your client until they sign the document. And I,
Hmm.
I actually love the new way a lot better, anyways. And I think this is the way that everyone should be doing it. But because in the buyer's world, you've just never had to do it before. And it
Right.
just creates, I think this is going to really put a lot of pressure on professionalism in the industry as well. I can't wait.
Yeah. I do hear people talk about that, and sometimes I'm like, I think these people are full of shit. They can't wait. But then I do know, like, man, there's some really, really good real estate agents, and they do a lot of deals, and you could just see why. The professionalism. It
Oh,
just
yeah.
shines like a diamond, baby.
Well, that's the thing, is like on the listing side, it's the same thing. I mean, there's a reason that so much, like, people would rather list than buy. And it's like, it's almost guaranteed business. But, like right now, what would you rather have, three high qualified buyers or one, listing? I think people, or three listings. I think people would take, if they're hot listings and great, and they check the location, condition, and price, everyone would take those. But the reality is, I think three high qualified buyers right now, in my opinion, is a better play. But
Yeah.
that's just, and I'm sure I'll probably get blown up for that comment, but I put the tech question out there all the time, and people are like, "Oh, I would take three YouTube clients any day of the week."
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. And obviously, doing some flipping right now, I'm feeling the pain of listing houses. I just got my report today, 58 days on market on average where I'm at. And I'm like, God, the realization that we're not in COVID anymore, it fucking hurts.
Dude, it's crazy. I just sold mine too in Sherwood, and
Yeah.
dude, the two houses that I was competing against are still on the market, sitting there, and
Yep.
one of them's below me now, where I was at, and I remember the neighbors were blowing me, "Oh yeah, you're overpricing this house, blah 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 blah." They were giving me so much crap, dude. And I'm like, all right, sold it 1 week over list. Peace out, homies. I just
Yeah.
did you guys
No.
a big solid favor.
Yes. I need you licensed in Texas, but I know you got to go here soon. So the other aspect that what I kind of wanted to finish with too is, well, actually, one thing real quick, Buffett was talking about when he actually got up and spoke on that. I remember like the one thing I really caught from it was like, first of all, I think he's only sold like one house in his life, even though he's
Yeah,
a
I think he said
multi.
he did two transactions.
Yeah, he's like, I think that the actual model of like that 6% is fair. He goes, I have studied it and studied it for like 30 years, and it is the most fair way to do real estate. But he gets it from an investing side and a smart side. The buyers, the sellers out there, right? And they hear all this negative news. They're the ones. In fact, my really good friend, I was talking with him about this, and he's like, "What do you think about it?" I'm like, "Man, I think it's going to cause a mess." He's like, because he was like, "Yeah, this is kind of bullshit that we have to pay." I had a house, dude. I found the buyer. I knew him. I was selling it, and I have my friend who's a real estate agent. He was just going to do the contracts for 1%. So this guy comes, and all of a sudden, we're in contract, and now I see a line item for like, because it was like an 800 something $1,000 house, 30, 40 grand. He's like, what the hell? Well, that buyer, unbeknownst to my friend, had signed an agreement with an agent that just said, any house that you're going to buy, no matter what, you owe me 3% commission. And so he had to write this $24,000 commission to this guy who had no. So in his mind, he's like, this is bullshit. Like,
Well, wait, what if I was that agent, I would have made the buyer pay it in that situation.
didn't happen. Seller. So the only reason I love coming from the angle of like in the shoes,
So,
that's why these stories happen, and then that word travels.
well, okay. So this is exactly when you look at the statistics of for sale by owner, the only ones that are successful are the ones who sell it to a friend, sell it to a neighbor, sell it to a tenant. However, statistically, it's always like 20% below market value. And like that's a good reason of why selling to people off the market is typically not a good idea, is because it's very rare that both people are winning in those situations. And I get it, dude. The seller's like, I'm gonna make more money,
Yep.
I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do that. You know, that's why when I have conversations with sellers and they're arguing over 1% in that situation, I'm like, okay, your house is 800,000. You're complaining to me about $8,000, but I just gave you a range of where your house is going to sell, 750 to 800. Every $10,000 or $8,000, is a 1% click. So if you go do it yourself, dude, you're going to make $50,000 less, or you can just pay me 1% more and I'm going to get you another 50K. So you're
Yeah.
going to end up netting 42K more, but everyone gets this thing stuck in their mind where the Zestimate is what the price is that house is going to sell for no matter what. No, if you hire the best agent, they do the best marketing, they have the best communication, then you're going to get that top end of the market.
Yeah.
That's why, like, when you go through like negotiation school and whatnot in classes, like, this is why every agent should do it, is because how many times a seller hears, I have the best marketing. I'm going to put your house on 600 platforms. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. Sellers ask me all the time, like, what are you going to do differently? Is there a couple of tools that I have that I think are better than what most people get? Absolutely. What you're hiring me for is my communication skills, my negotiation skills, and my expertise. That's really what you're paying me for, because everyone's going to put the house on the MLS the
Right.
same. Most people are going to do professional photography the same. Like, those things are not special. So this is why, like, hiring an attorney, this is like why I always give that correlation. The average agent, in my opinion, is like a court appointed lawyer. Like, they're all going to do the basics
Yep.
and give you, follow the rules. And then you start stepping up. And the models reflect that. I mean, Redfin's out there, low cost brokerage. They spend $100 million a year on advertising, yet they have less than a 1% market share. It's like, that model doesn't work. People have already proven that low cost models are not the real estate industry. People will pay money. Like, when you're referencing what your buddy said, like, those are all like the edge deals of like 1% that people get stuck
Yep.
on.
Yep. Oh, that's what I told him too.
And what do we know? The loudest boos come from the cheapest seats, dude. That's why everyone's correlation is all of this, dude. 70% of the industry are all getting referred to and having great experiences. I mean, the statistics say that everybody still want to use agents for the most part.
Yeah, because I think Coldwell Banker and Redfin aren't joining in. But here, so last question before we
No,
go.
Coldwell Banker is, they're part of Anywhere.
Well, because right here, okay, so NAR is a powerful industry player and even owns the trademark on the word realtor, which I always say realtor and get killed for it. But legal challenges and internal turmoil have shaken some agents' faith in the group, and at least two Seattle-based brokerages, Redfin and Coldwell Banker Danforth, have left the organization. So what if there's like a coalition or something to where
Oh,
everybody just leaves NAR?
well, they left NAR, but they still paid the settlement. And the reason that they did that is because, in my opinion, is that they wanted to distance themselves because of the lawsuit. No one has to be part of NAR. Here's the thing. Think about all these agents out there that aren't part of NAR. They're all susceptible to this lawsuit as well. So I think it's a stupid thing. Redfin already paid the settlement. They already
Yeah.
paid their settlement. So Coldwell Banker is part of Anywhere. They already paid their settlement as well. So they can leave NAR. They can leave the MLS. I just think it's a tactical play. Dude, here's the thing. agents complaining about NAR is like a for sale by owner complaining about their agent or saying, this is why I'm not using an agent. NAR just isn't really good at voicing what they do for agents. Do you know the NAR is the most like lobbied organization on Capitol Hill? Like there is a lot of protections that they give to real estate agents. So if you're a real estate agent and you love your life and you love getting paid and you love what you do, you can thank NAR, in my opinion. I just say pay the freaking fee. I hear it all the time from agents complaining
Yeah,
about it
why? Why do we
because
hear
they
it
don't do a
so
good
much?
job. Oh, okay. When I look at NAR, what do I see? I see a bunch of dinosaurs sitting there hiring crappy attorneys, and I don't feel like I'm getting any value from it. That's how every other agent feels too. They need to modernize and come to into the world of the modern agents world. And I think it's like old school, good old boys network, and it's not all guys. There's women in there too. They're doing this whole like play now where they're trying to like bring all of these different people into the mix. You know, they had Tracy Casper in there, the CEO. She's actually from Idaho. She just resigned. You know, they bring in all these people because they're trying to like give this face like we're inclusive here. And I just don't think they're hiring the best people. I think their attorneys sucked with the NAR thing. I watched that whole deal go down. I watched the trial. It was laughable. Dude, it just the agents just don't feel like they're getting anything for it.
Right.
And that's the problem.
So we feel that way towards NAR as
Yeah,
the local people feel against real estate agents.
100%, dude. That's what I say. I'm like, this is the way it is. And I just tell agents like, hey, you should be grateful that they're protecting us to try to, keep our industry moving.
Yep.
Every dude, and here's the other thing. Every person that's like in government for the most part, and the people that cause this problem are like new coming like politicians. They just look at everyone in Congress and all these people, they're all old heads and they're all like massive investors, I guarantee, and they probably love real estate agents.
Yep.
I mean, the reason this went through is because realistically, the election's coming up and they knew they had to get this thing through before the election cycle because the guy that's running against the current guy is a massive real estate mogul and he loves real estate agents too. So,
Yep. Okay. We hit 11 o'clock on the dot. I know you got to go.
yep,
Info@jacksonwilkie.com. Ask us your questions or your crazy points, and me and the JDAL bring it up on the podcast.
perfect. Let's
We
roll.
might even bring you up on the podcast. We want to get into the nitty gritty court cases, listing cases, just what's going on, marketing. Hit us up, homies.
See ya.